Welcome to the JTP Sports Podcast. We want to give a big shout out to the guys from The Black Light for the theme music intro to the show. It's available on all streaming services, and you can check them out at The Black Music on Instagram. You can also find more information for them in the pod description.
Welcome to the JTP Sports NFL Week 2 picks for every game against the spread. Today we have Joey.
How you doing?
And I'm Paul. Let's see how we did last week. How did you do? What was your record?
I believe I got 7 right. I think I'm in the lead as we go into week 2.
Yeah, you are. I think one game ahead of me. You were 7-8-1. I went 6-9-1. Ted had a week showing of 3-12-1.
Yeah, that's bad.
It's bad. There were a couple games where, if they went how we thought they were going to go, we would have had better records. One of them being the Washington at Philly game. Washington scored that garbage time touchdown at the end of the game, which made Philly not cover. They did have they did it a lot better than I think everybody was expecting them to do, period. But that touchdown hurt. The other game comes to mind that screwed us, quite badly was the Detroit-Arizona game, because they had that wrapped up in the fourth quarter and then just basically gave it back to Arizona for a tie at the end. They were a 2.5-point favorite based on the lines we had, and that ended up being a tie. So those two definitely went against us for week 3. All right, so let's look at the games we have on the schedule this week. We start off Thursday night. Let me get that game and the line, Joey.
So the Thursday night game this week is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going to Carolina to face the Panthers. As it stands right now, the Panthers are a 6.5-point favorite. After last week's game, the injury report is only showing Tampa Bay with one of their D linemen out with a hand injury. The official injury report has not come out, so there haven't been any additions to the injury report of note as of yet. So again, with the line being 6.5, just based on what we saw last week, Carolina didn't look great against the Rams, but they also didn't look atrocious. Tampa Bay, on the other hand, Jameis Winston, as we discussed previously, just looked like he's regressing. Unfortunately for Tampa Bay and their fans, he just couldn't seem to get it together, and that was against the San Francisco defense that's probably going to be middle of the road to a little less than that by the end of the season. Carolina's defense is better than that. I don't know that Jameis Winston is going to make the necessary improvements from last week to this week, especially on the short calendar. So I've got Carolina covering the 6.5.
This one I struggled with. I know we talked about the soft mic a little bit. I wasn't sure. I had Tampa Bay, but I just now changed my pick. And here's why. I'm going with Carolina. Winston was so bad. He should have had 5 picks. I mean, we talked about this extensively in our Week 1 review when we went over all the games, and I have no faith in him doing what is required of him to do to score points on Carolina. Tampa's defense was okay, but I still don't think they stopped McCaffrey. I'm not a big fan of Cam Newton, as you all know if you've listened to this at this point, but he's better than Winston is. I have more faith in Cam Newton and McCaffrey moving the ball on Tampa Bay than I have in Winston and that offense moving the ball in Carolina. I'm going to go with Carolina covering here. Ted's out for this episode, but we do have his picks. He also has Carolina covering here, so we have a sweep. Let's look at our Sunday games. The first one we have on our schedule here is Indy at Tennessee. Tennessee is -3 for this one, a 3-point favorite. So basically, the bookies look at this as a pick'em game since it's a home game for Tennessee. I am picking Indy to win this one, and or at least to get within 3 points of Tennessee on this one. I was really impressed with Indy in that game versus the Chargers last week. They were able to move the ball at will on that Chargers defensive front, which in reality is probably at least as good as that Tennessee front. The Chargers had a very stout defense last year. They haven't lost much to that. They have a very decent defensive line and front seven. Indy just took that game over with that offensive line. I think they basically come out running that same game plan that they had going in the second half versus the Chargers. I don't see Tennessee having a better luck stopping the run versus Indy. I got Indy. What do you have?
I like how you use luck for Indianapolis. That's a cute little joke you made there. I've got the Titans in this game. I feel like the Tennessee Titans defense really showed something last week. Now we discussed at length about how the coaching staff for the Browns didn't get them prepared for that game, and Baker Mayfield, despite the decent numbers, just didn't look like he was ready to go. But I think a lot of that had to do with the Tennessee defense. He threw the 3 picks. They should have had another one that we discussed. Should have been a pick 6. I think the Titans defense is better than we probably thought it was going to be going into this season. Tennessee, I think, is going to stick to the run more than the Chargers did. So if Tennessee is able to develop any kind of lead going into the late stages of the game, they're going to lean on Derrick Henry. And Derrick Henry was a monster last week against a fairly decent Cleveland Browns front 7, whereas the Chargers got away from the run in the second half against the Colts. And when they did run, they were fairly successful. So I think Tennessee, in their home opener, is going to come out, and I think they're going to do just enough to win this game. Three to me is probably. I mean, I could easily see this being a 3-point game just because I think both teams are fairly evenly matched. But I mean, Tennessee by a touchdown is probably where I see this going. Ted also has the Titans winning this game as well, so he and I are seeing eye to eye on this one. Now, to add a little something else, I will point this out. Indianapolis is going to be missing Devin Funchess for this game. He was their big name, quote-unquote, big name free agent acquisition at the wide receiver position. He's got a collarbone fracture, I believe it is. He's not going to miss the season, but he will miss the next few games. So I think that's a big hit to their offense. So that's another reason that I believe that Tennessee's got the advantage in this game.
Just to touch on that real quick, this is one of the toughest games to me this week. I was really impressed with Tennessee as well as to how they handled Cleveland. I mean, Cleveland was kind of a mess, so I don't know how much we can take away from that and how much we can tell how good Tennessee really is. But I feel like these two teams are really evenly matched. I mean, if I have to pick a winner, I'm going with Indy, or at least somebody to cover that 3. But this was a tough one.
All right, so the next game we have on the schedule is the aforementioned LA Chargers going to Detroit. Laughably to me, the Chargers are only a 2.5-point favorite. I know it's a road game, and the Chargers are historically mediocre when they go cross country. Detroit isn't exactly cross country, and they really, really struggled last week against Kyler Murray and the Cardinals offense in the second half. I don't know how this line is that low. It seems almost comical to me. The only issue I could see that potentially for the Chargers is we obviously don't have the advanced injury report, but Mike Williams did leave that game with a knee injury, so that might slow the Chargers offense down a little bit. But Phillip Rivers is a more polished quarterback than Kyler Murray. That offense is a more finished product than the Arizona offense is. I think the Chargers win this one easily. I think they learned their lesson from last week that they can't get off to a fast start and coast. I think that they put it on the Lions, and this one's going to be over early, and they keep the pressure going, and Detroit doesn't have a chance to come back.
This is going to be a stupid game, isn't it? This is just going to be dumb.
More than likely.
Yeah, I am also picking the Chargers. Minus the 2.5, but I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Detroit somehow ends up winning this game in just a dumb game. I mean, the Chargers are on the road. They did fade in that Indy game. Indy's offensive line basically took that game over in the second half. They did pull the win over the Colts out in overtime, but they really struggled in the second half for the most part. I think you alluded to in a review show that the Chargers ran only like 20 plays in the second half, and he just controlled the clock and basically controlled the game in the second half. Detroit can't do the same thing to the Chargers. That's the only thing. If Detroit wins this, it's for some dumb reasons, and I see that potentially happening. I think this is a big game for Patricia. If that team starts 0-2, and or actually I guess they got a tie tonight, but if they start 0-1 and their defense looks inept again like they did at the end of that Arizona game, he's already on the hot seat, and it's just going to get worse from there. I have no faith in Detroit actually keeping up with the Chargers, but we'll see what happens. Ted also has the Chargers here, so another game where we all sweep. That takes us to Buffalo at New York, the Giants. Buffalo is a 2-point favorite at time of recording. I am picking Buffalo here. The Giants' offense was not bad. They were fairly impressive versus the Dallas defense. I think the Buffalo defense is better than the Dallas defense, and the Giants have no defense. So, Buffalo actually ended up being able to move the ball a little bit on the Jets last week, who have a much better defense than the Giants do. I don't think they have as much of a problem in this game as long as they can keep the ball and not give it away 4 times in the first half, and I think they'll do a better job of that versus the Giants defense. I think that this line is actually kind of low, and it seems to be coming down. I guess people are betting on the Giants for some reason. I'm not really sure why. I see this Buffalo all the way. Who do you have?
I also have Buffalo all the way for a lot of the same reasons you just mentioned. The Giants' defense, as we discussed at length, is just bad. There's really no other way to describe it. It's bad. It's not Dolphins bad, obviously, but what is? But last week against a fairly good defense, Josh Allen found a rapport with John Brown. And what John Brown has is take the top off speed. And what did the Giants really, really struggle with last week was Gallup and Amari Cooper going downfield. I can see that being a recurring theme in this game. I think Buffalo probably wins this game handily, to be honest with you. I think Josh Allen's gonna put last week's struggles behind him. As again, this is a much, much, much worse defense than the Jets' defense is. Buffalo, however, is missing a safety. Taron Johnson left last week with a hamstring injury. I don't know if that's going to make that big of a difference. I think Barkley is obviously going to get his. I think Eli is going to be fairly decent. He won't put up the same 306, I think it was, that he had last week. They'll do enough to make it interesting for a while, but I think Buffalo, just from the standpoint of Singletary, Brown, and Josh Allen being able to do what he's able to do, I think they're going to take this one, and they're going to take it fairly handily. Ted has also got Buffalo in this game, so it looks like we've got another clean sweep on this one. Arizona, Baltimore. That is this is a tricky game on the surface. Baltimore is getting 13.5, which is a lot. That's a lot, given the fact that everybody was a naysayer about this offense going into the offseason. There were a lot of question marks about the passing game. 1 week against Miami, and suddenly the needle moves to the other side, and Baltimore's getting 13.5. Anybody who's listened to us knows that I'm chugging two-handedly with the Lamar Jackson Kool-Aid, and after one game, he looked great. After one game, he looked great. Now, whether or not he can do that against Arizona, who now has tape on the Baltimore passing attack, is a different story. 13.5, I feel, is a little lofty. I can see Baltimore still doing enough to win this game by double digits, but a near 2-touchdown margin is a little too much, too rich for my blood. I've got Arizona covering in this game.
I agree. I got the same thing. I just don't think you learned anything really about Baltimore last week. I think Miami is just putrid. I mean, that was a historically bad opening week home game for any team. I think it was actually the worst home opening game since the merger for any team in football history, which is saying a lot. Baltimore's schedule for the first 2 games of the year, they get Miami, and now they get Arizona at home. It's crazy. This team should definitely be 2-0. There's no way they're losing this game. I would be very surprised, but 13.5 as it stands right now, based on the fact of what we've both said about the Dolphins, I can't see Baltimore being able to replicate it. If they do, we're going to have a different kind of conversation about them. I just don't know what you saw out of, there's no way Arizona is as bad as Miami is. They showed up versus the Lions last week, at least towards the end of the game. I think they figured some things out finally. The Lions' defense scheme definitely helped them out in the fourth quarter. Baltimore's defense is a little bit better, but I think Arizona's going to actually start to kind of put some things together. I just can't swallow that almost 2-touchdown deficit. I got to take Arizona to at least get it within 13.5. Ted's also got Arizona, 2 for his blood. That takes us to New England at Miami. This is a 19-point line right now. New England minus 19. I don't think it gets any better for Miami. I'm picking New England. New England just basically shellacked the Steelers, who are a professional football team. They beat them by 30, and they made them look foolish out there. Miami is a NCAA team right now. I mean, that's what they looked like last week versus Baltimore. they would have to have so much go right for them to be able to be in this game, and I don't see that happening by week 2. That roster is depleted. They have, no kind of motivation right now. The morale is at an all-time low in Miami. I know the margin is 19 points and it's ridiculous, but I just can't pick Miami to cover even that kind of spread. I mean, I don't know where the spread would have to be for me to take Miami, like 28? I mean, 25, something like that, something in the 20s. At 3 touchdowns, I'm still picking New England. Who do you have?
I've also got New England. I had New England when it was 18 and a half. I've got New England now that it's 19. Like you said, even if it was 28, I'd be hard-pressed to say no to that. Ryan Fitzpatrick's been in the league long enough so that there's tape on what to do to get him to crack. And if anybody's going to solve that riddle, it's Bill Belichick. What Bill Belichick and the Patriots have done historically is take away your number one option. If they don't take him away, they minimize him. And who the hell is that on this Miami Dolphins offense? I mean, if it's Devontae Parker, you don't have to do much to nullify him. I mean, he's been kind of a disappointment for the Dolphins since he came in through the draft. Albert Wilson is going to be a little bit offline this week with his calf injury, so if he plays, he might not be as effective as he usually is. But again, the Patriots know how to make you look bad. They just made a much better football team look bad. And 19, if this grows to 22, I would still take the Patriots. There is not a chance, even with the looming potential suspension of Antonio Brown. If you're not even throwing AB out there, I don't think this matters. I think this is just an absolute pounding by the New England Patriots. Ted also agrees. He's happy to take that 18 and a half, 19 points, whatever it is.
No, Ted's got Miami.
Oh, you're right. He does. I read this wrong.
Yeah, and this is the second week in a row. He picked Miami last week versus Baltimore, and that didn't go well for him, and he's doubling down on Miami. Maybe it's the amount of points, but I just don't see it. Just to touch on what you said, New England is not a team to take a week off and overlook an opponent under Belichick. They've never done that. Miami is in for it this week. I'm actually curious to see how bad this game is going to get. If this game is within 30 points, I will be surprised, to be honest. Anything less than 4 touchdowns here, I would be very surprised. I think New England just absolutely destroys them, but continue. Sorry about that.
No, it's quite all right. If there's anywhere in the league that Tom Brady has maybe been not Tom Brady, it has been Miami. If you recall last year, Miami beat New England on that bizarre kickoff thing where the ball got lateraled, and then Kenyon Drake wound up running past the bumbling, stumbling Rob Gronkowski, who was out on the field for God knows what reason. I don't think it's going to come close. I think the closest a kickoff play is going to come to mattering is the opening kickoff. This is going to be a sit back, relax, and watch somebody get their asses kicked tomorrow on Sunday, because it's not going to be anywhere close. So that then takes us to Dallas at Washington. Dallas at post time is now a 5-point favorite. We spoke about this again. Just because Dallas looked really, really good against the Giants, and the Giants' defense is just atrocious. Washington's defense played. I mean, great. You can kick the score out the window as far as the Eagles game is concerned. They got burned by a good quarterback and a good wide receiver who just beat guys. Josh Norman isn't what he used to be, and I say that knowing that Josh Norman is still going to be on the Redskins this week. But I think Washington's defense is a much better team unit than the Giants defense. I could see something funky happening because this is in Washington. It's a road game for the Cowboys. So I could see Dallas winning this game, but I could see Washington covering as well.
Yeah, this one was a tough one for me to pick. I changed my pick to Dallas late in the week last week over the Giants, and I'm glad I did because that game ended up being not very close. I think this week we learned a lot more about this Cowboys team. Washington definitely showed up versus Philly. It looked like they had a solid game plan from Gruden. That they executed. They had a pretty solid lead going into, the second half there. Philly kind of took that game over, but Philly's just a much better team. I don't know if, how much they exposed them, but, the way they got that lead was basically just coming out in the second half, being more direct, just running the ball down the middle, towards that offensive front of the Redskins, and that is something that Dallas will definitely be looking to do. I still think Dallas covers this 5 points. I just think this is going to be a much closer game than the Giants game was.
The only thing I will say this, I'm sorry, not to cut you off, but to cut you off. The only thing that gives me a little pause, and I'm sticking with my pick, but the Redskins did lose 2 defensive linemen. They lost Jonathan Allen in the first quarter to a knee injury. He didn't return, so that's probably not a good sign. And again, we don't have an official injury report as of right now. And they lost Caleb Brantley to an ankle injury in the fourth quarter. So without knowing what the injury report's going to be, the final injury report's going to be, I'm still sticking with my pick, but losing those 2 defensive linemen is going to hurt, especially in week 2 of Ezekiel Elliott getting back in the flow. But I still feel like Washington finds a way to probably make this a nail-biting 3-point win for the Cowboys. So I'm sticking with my Redskins covering. Or the Redskins, excuse me.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that. Washington definitely came out and shocked the world with their passing attack under Keenum, who almost went for 400. As I alluded to in our review show, I don't think that Philly secondary is that great. So if they have success, and I don't think the Dallas secondary is that great either. So if they have any success replicating that, I think Philadelphia's defense overall is much better than the Cowboys' defense. This could be pretty close and go down to the wire. I'll stick with Dallas, but I think this one is tough to pick, and I don't know if I said this before, but Ted's also got Dallas here. Takes us to our next game, and that is the Jaguars going into Houston. Houston is an 8.5-point favorite. Houston, I know me and you are both very high on Houston this year, and I think it showed up versus New Orleans in that epic Monday night game, week 1. I think Houston is just too much of a team now. It falls out for Jacksonville really to be in this game throughout the whole 60 minutes. Minshew, the quarterback for Jacksonville, was very impressive as a backup coming in, going something like 22 out of 25 for 275. I think he had a touchdown and a pick late. He was like 14 of 14 on his first 14 pass attempts. There was a lot of short yard stuff, but he looked decent going a little bit down the field. He was definitely much more impressive. I didn't even know who their backup quarterback was until he was in the game. And I was very impressed with his performance. The KC defense is nothing to write home about. Houston's much more stout, even though New Orleans kind of, picked them apart when they needed to in the second half. But that's the Drew Brees-led New Orleans Saints powerhouse offense, so it's a whole different story here. I just have Houston covering, winning by more than 8.5 points here. I see them winning this game probably by 2 touchdowns. What do you have?
There's not a chance that Minshew is able to replicate what he did last week. The Houston Texans defense is a much better overall unit than the Kansas City defense is. You saw what they were able to do against Drew Brees, a top 5 all-time quarterback in the first half. Now, he was able to do what he was able to do in the second half, but that's Drew Brees. Gardner Minshew is no Drew Brees. With them losing Nick Foles potentially for the year, but probably only until week 11, that's going to be a problem for this Jacksonville offense. Now there's tape on Gardner Minshew. He's not going to come out of nowhere and do whatever he could just because nobody knew who he was. So I think with the Texans getting a week to prepare for this kid, I think they're really going to make life difficult on him. I think they're going to make him beat them. I think they're going to try to take Fournette away from them and make Minshew win, and I just can't see that happening in his first road game. So I've got them easily covering in this game. Ted's also got Houston in this game. It just seems like it's just too much for Jacksonville to overcome in back-to-back weeks. I mean, obviously, it's just, you lose a guy who you were counting on to make you competitive for the long haul, and he breaks his collarbone. It's a tough break, and the kid's got a lot on his plate right now going on the road to Houston. So that takes us to the Seattle Seahawks going into Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh got their doors blown off last week by the Patriots. It was a very, very pathetic showing. Roethlisberger didn't get a lot of his numbers until the fourth quarter, so if you take that away, he looked pedestrian. It was just not a good showing for the Pittsburgh Steelers offense or defense. Seattle also didn't look great at home against the Cincinnati Bengals. So this is a game where two teams have something to prove. They're coming off a couple lackluster performances. Pittsburgh is getting 4 at home. I think Pittsburgh has got better weapons, and it's a better overall scheme than the Cincinnati Bengals team. I think that Big Ben comes out. It's a home game. It's a redemption game for him. Again, who's to say what the Seattle defense really is if Andy Dalton was able to carve them up for over 400 yards? I've got Pittsburgh winning this game comfortably, actually.
Yeah, I have Pittsburgh as well, and just to touch on it, so does Ted. I think we have a clean sweep here. I fully agree with you that I think this is going to be two, traditionally very good football teams trying to make a statement that they're better than they're showing in week one. I think overall my thoughts are that Pittsburgh is just a better team, period. They played a machine, a football machine in New England in week one, and they just couldn't keep up with them, and not many teams are going to be able to. I have serious questions about that Seattle offensive line when it comes to pass blocking. I think Pittsburgh is able to get to Wilson. I don't think he's effective as he was versus Cincinnati, and that Cincy defense was impressive. Let's give them the credit that they deserve, but
sure.
I think Pittsburgh is just a better team overall on offense and on defense, and like you alluded to, Dalton was able to carve up that D for 400 yards. This is a home game for Pittsburgh. They got to get on the right track, get that ship heading in the right direction. So I have them, minus the 4. So does Ted. That takes us to San Francisco going into the aforementioned Cincinnati Bengals. The line is Cincinnati by 2. I have Cincinnati here. I was very impressed with this team under that new coach. They seem to have made all the proper changes from the previous regime, at least through week one, through one game. They looked a lot more competitive, a lot more solid. They didn't make a lot of mistakes. Ross looked like an all-star, Pro Bowl wide receiver out there versus that Seahawks secondary. San Francisco was not overly impressive versus Tampa Bay, who basically gave them endless opportunities to win that game, and it was still fairly close till the end of the game until Winston threw another pick six to wrap that up. But I just think that Cincinnati kind of shows up, and we learn exactly who they are going forward this week, and we see that there are still problems with San Francisco. San Francisco's on the road again. I got Cincinnati minus the points. Who do you have?
So with this being a 2-point game in favor of Cincinnati, clearly the bookies think that Cincinnati's not good enough at home to be a strong bet. I disagree for all the reasons that you just laid out. Cincinnati looked really, really good in a historically tough place to play up in Seattle. Andy Dalton, as I just said, went for over 400 yards. He was able to find John Ross down the field. Tyler Boyd didn't put up the splashy numbers that Ross did, but he had 8 catches for another 60 yards. So, the only thing that gives me a little bit of worry for Cincinnati is the fact that Joe Mixon is out for this game. He's their do-everything back. Not that Gio Bernard is a bum, but he's obviously not Joe Mixon. So we don't know what the status of his ankle injury is, but San Francisco lost Tevin Coleman with a high ankle sprain, and high ankle sprains take a long time to heal, so they're going to be leaning on Matt Breida, Raheem Mostert. I don't know that those guys, not that Coleman is a world beater on his own, but I don't know that those guys are going to help, considering that Cincinnati was able to. Carson had a decent game, I think, with the touchdown he had last week, but they did a pretty good job wrapping up that Seattle rushing offense. So
yeah, they did very well.
Yeah,
Seattle was not able to run the ball effectively at all.
Yeah, so I think this being a home game, Cincinnati showing what they showed last week, I think that 2 points is something that they're going to easily cover. Ted, I'm trying to find where he's got. Ted's got Cincinnati in this game as well. Sorry, I was unable to find that.
Yep.
So Ted's got Cincinnati as well. Looks like we're all picking Cincinnati for all the reasons we just laid out. So next game on our slate takes us to the Green Bay Packers playing the Minnesota Vikings. So this is, Minnesota going to Green Bay. This is a 3-point line for Green Bay, so kind of sort of a pick'em game. Just based on what we saw last week, Matt LaFleur's offense wasn't all that impressive. Granted, they were going against one of the best defensive units in the league in the Chicago Bears. Minnesota's defense isn't bad. I mean, you weren't high on them coming into this season, but they did enough. Matt Ryan put up his numbers, and a couple other guys. Austin Hooper had some numbers, but they did enough to make that team kind of one-dimensional and shut them down until the fourth quarter. I know this is a Packer home game. I know this is going to be something that where Green Bay comes out and they're going to be riding that high after being able to go into hostile territory at Soldier Field. But I think just based on what Minnesota was able to do last week with that defense, I could see them winning this game. Now they did lose a cornerback to an elbow injury. He did not come back. So again, we don't have that final injury report, but I still think that the Minnesota defense, based on what we saw last week, is going to be able to give Aaron Rodgers enough fits. I don't know that the Packers defense is going to be able to stop everything, because even if they're able to nullify a little bit of what Dalvin Cook last week, there's no chance that, I mean, Alvin Robinson caught 7 balls for over 100 yards last week. I love Allen Robinson as a Bears fan, but Thielen and Diggs are probably higher up on the depth chart as far as overall wide receivers are concerned. I don't think they can shut both of those guys down. I think Minnesota wins this game in Green Bay.
Yeah, just to clarify, by no means do I think that the Vikings defense is bad. You know, that's a very solid, well-coached group, and they're not, in my opinion, on the same level as the Bears defense is, and I don't know if any team in the league really is. I mean, that defense is, you know, widely regarded as the top unit in the league, and, you know, based on their performance last year, that's probably true. What we saw from the Green Bay offense was not impressive versus Chicago's defense at all. Outside of a 3-play drive that got them the touchdown, that offense did nothing that whole game. They could not run the ball at all. Aaron Rodgers looked extremely pedestrian. I think he went for, including that touchdown drive, for something like 160 yards on 30 pass attempts. You know, it's a very low average. He didn't look like Aaron Rodgers. Now, a lot of that has to do with the Bears defense. We get it. I don't think Minnesota's defense is far behind. However, this is Rodgers versus versus the Vikings, and we saw how these games go. You know, last year, week 2, this was a complete shootout with no defense. I think it ended up in a tie. I wouldn't be surprised if something like that happens again. I just have more faith in that Minnesota team currently at this stage of the year. This is a tough one for me to pick. I think me and you both have Minnesota, and Ted's got Green Bay here, and this is a pick 'em. On the books for a reason. It could go either way. No one really knows what's going to transpire. The only thing that has me holding back on Green Bay is that this is a year 1 offense for Aaron Rodgers. It didn't look exactly the same as we're used to under McCarthy. I think if this is still a McCarthy-led Green Bay team with the same offense, Rodgers, just picks them apart like he always does. I think it's going to be a little bit different, for Green Bay here, week 2 at home versus Minnesota. I got Minnesota, cutting into that 3-point favorite Green Bay team. That takes us to KC at Oakland. KC is a 7.5-point favorite, and this is starting to come down. I think a lot of money is going in on Oakland or coming in on Oakland. I'm a little surprised at this line that it's only 7.5, to be honest with you. I still have Oakland, based on their performance in week 1 versus the highly touted, supposed, great defense of Denver. And they seemed like Oakland that has had no issues moving the ball. They were able to be extremely efficient. Carr was like 22 out of 25 for, 280 or whatever it was. He's never looked better in his career. He had no problems moving the ball. That Oakland O-line held up really well and was able to keep Carr basically clean the whole game. It was pretty crazy to see that happen, actually. The only thing, the Kansas City defense is nowhere near the level of Denver's defense, period. Overall, they're just not the same type of defensive units. However, that KC offense is terrifying. They put up 40 on Jacksonville like it was nothing, and I think you alluded to that they probably left some points out there. If they really wanted to, put the pedal to the floor, they probably could have put up 50 on Jacksonville if they really wanted to last week. That's why I feel like this line is maybe a little low. I still have Oakland. I think they kind of make a statement here, but I wouldn't be surprised to see this go the other way. Who do you have?
I initially had Oakland, and while I was sitting here thinking about it, I know the line dropped from 8 to 7.5, which means the money is going towards Oakland after what they did last week. But as you and I were discussing off mic, they did just lose Jonathan Abram.
Yeah.
They're promising safety. I mean, we don't know what he is in coverage as of yet, but you do know that he's able to follow guys. He's got the speed, he's got the instincts, and he's what we saw in Hard Knocks. If that means anything, the kid's not afraid to hit somebody. So he's out with a torn labrum, and it looks like he's going to miss the rest of the year. So I think that's a bigger deal than I initially gave it credit for. I think that's a big loss in their secondary. I think that's going to be a big time problem, even though Kansas City is going to be missing Tyreek Hill. They really like Mecole Hardman because he's got the same kind of speed. Sammy Watkins, I feel like he's really hit or miss, but who's to say that he doesn't put another game like that together? Abram probably would have been shadowing Travis Kelce anyway. So now that's an even bigger matchup problem because whoever their backup is, Kelsey's a nightmare matchup for no matter who it is out there. With that being said, with Abram being out, I think that I'm fairly confident now in thinking that Kansas City covers. I think that is a big loss. I think Oakland may actually have a little bit of a letdown after having such an emotional high of actually being able to win that game with all the stuff that had been swirling around before that from their former never played a game wide receiver. So I initially had Oakland, but I'm turning the page. I'm taking the Chiefs to cover in this one. Ted agrees with me. I don't know if it's the same reasoning that I had. Who cares? But he's taking the Chiefs as well, which takes us to a rematch.
Well, hold on. Before we do that, I have Oakland for now. I don't know if I'm going to stick with it. Based on what you just laid out there, I know Hill is out for KC. I don't know if that makes that much of a difference now that Abrams out, and Oakland needs all the help they can get on the defensive side of the ball.
Just switch it, Paul.
I'll tweet it out if I do. For now, I'm going to stick with Oakland, and I feel like if I do, I'm going to end up eating this one. I don't know. This one, it's 7.5 points, and the line is coming down. I feel like as soon as it hits 7, if it gets to that point, people are just going to flood, towards KC again, and the line's just going to move back up. We'll see how that goes. I think it's at this line, and we might be overvaluing Oakland's performance in Week 1 because of how, just pedestrian that Denver defense looked for some reason up until late in that game. We know that Kansas City is going to come in here and they're going to be firing on all cylinders with or without Tyreek Hill. Yeah, you know what? I have to do it. I'm going to go with KC. I can't do it. I can't go with Oakland.
It's hard.
I just can't do it. I have to go with KC. And at least if somehow Oakland ends up covering that, okay. We didn't expect.
At least all three of us got it
right,
wrong.
But I just can't do it yet. Chucky, prove me wrong. Cut into this 7.5 points versus KC, and then we'll talk about it in Week 3.
That takes us into the rematch from last year's NFC Championship game. The New Orleans Saints go to LA to play the Rams. As it stands right now, the Rams are a 2.5 point favorite. Based on what we saw last week, where the Rams, granted it was on the road, it was against a pretty solid defense in Carolina. Jared Goff just did not look right. I mean, he didn't even crack 170 yards, let alone 200 yards. The running game was okay. It came on late, but I just feel that New Orleans is going to come into this game obviously furious. They're going to be looking for redemption after the screw job that was that non-pass interference call. I think Drew Brees is going to be coming in looking to make a statement in this game as well, trying to make sure that everyone understands that as after 2 weeks they're the cream of the crop in the NFC and that they're the better team. So I think New Orleans wins this road game. Now I will say this: New Orleans has a safety on the injury report. No details as whether or not Marcus Williams is going to play this week. And the Rams, Eric Weddle, if anybody watched that Rams Carolina game, Eric Weddle took a Christian McCaffrey knee to the side of the head and was bleeding like he got beat over the head with a baseball bat. So if Eric Weddle can't play because of that, it's a big loss to the secondary. And that Saints passing game in the second half looked on point. So I've got the Saints winning this game in LA.
Yeah, I'm going with the Rams here. Yeah, I think that this is the game where they have to make a statement that they belong in the conversation with New Orleans. I think New Orleans is coming off of a ridiculous game and win versus Houston at home. Now, they're not at home for this one. It's only a 2.5 point line for the Rams. They are, a slight underdog based on the fact they're at home, and I guess it's a half point, towards New Orleans at this point. I just think that they show up. They try to correct everything that went wrong in Carolina. They started to run Gurley more, and Gurley looked like Gurley in the second half of that game, I think they'd come out with that same type of game plan, and it really comes down to whether or not that New Orleans front can stop Gurley and that rushing attack, and they might be able to. But I think this is a lower scoring game than that last game for New Orleans was. I mean, both of these teams put up 30 last week. I see this being, with the winner maybe getting about 28, and the other, and New Orleans in this case would be at like 25 or less, 24, something like that. I think it's going to be a close one. I just think that the Rams pull it out at the end. Ted agrees with you here. He's got New Orleans, and I can't blame you guys based on what we saw last week. But that takes us to the Bears at the Broncos. The Bears at, recording are a 2.5-point favorite. And I think we all have the Bears. We'll get to that. I do. But this is a game of two teams that completely laid an egg and disappointed in week one. Now, the Bears' offense looked as bad as you can look, basically, in that game versus the Packers. That game plan was ridiculous. And I know that this is going up versus Vic Fangio, so it's not going to make things easier for Mitch. But I think what changes here is that Nagy takes a lot of the complexity out because it doesn't seem like Mitch can handle it. They just go with a more traditional look. They run the ball more here. Denver had a problem stopping the run. Denver had a problem getting to the quarterback versus Oakland. I think the Bears correct some things here. And I have a hard time picking the Bears just based on a simple fact here. Denver, since the merger in September, is got something like an 86% winning percentage at home. I just don't think that they have the offense versus this Bears defense. This offense looked horrific versus the Oakland defense. Imagine what the Bears are going to do to this offense and Flacco. I wouldn't be surprised if Flacco ends up on his back like 6 to 8 times in this game. That O-line isn't spectacular. Oakland was able to get to Flacco. And the receivers on the outside, you got Sanders out there, and Sutton looked pretty good, but a lot of that was later in the game when they just opened it up and kind of, were playing from behind and just trying to throw it versus softer coverage just to get back in that game, and weren't able to do it. I think from the get-go, though, if they just line up and try to run their offense versus the Chicago Bears defense, they're not going to have much success at all. How do you see this going?
I wanted to be a little nervous about this after seeing exactly what it was that the Bears did on offense. It was not good. It was extremely not good. Like you said, Mitch looked lost. Matt Nagy looked like he was an absolute noob, to use the video game term, out there as a coach. But then you watched the Monday night game, and Vic Fangio didn't look much better. Granted, he's a defensive guy, so you could put that at the feet of the offensive coach, but their offense looked bad. I mean, Joe Flacco had a similar stat line to Mitch Trubisky when all was said and done. They both threw for about 260 and a pick. But like you alluded to, there's a decent chance that Joe Flacco is going to get harassed the entirety of this game. Their right tackle, Jawan James, is out for this game. He's got a knee injury. And I believe he's the highest paid right tackle in the league. Now, I don't necessarily know that means he's the best, but Elway clearly thought that they needed to lock him in, and he's out. And their backup is, I could tell you that his name off the top of my head, but he's not as good. And the Raiders defense were getting to Joe Flacco. So I think Khalil Mack is probably going to be pissed off that his name is being bandied about as maybe he's not as good as we thought he was. So he's going to come out and he's going to have something to prove. Leonard Floyd had a great game against both Bakhtiari and Balaga last week as they swap back and forth. It's still Hicks, Goldman, Floyd, and Mack are going to harass Joe Flacco. I also think Nagy, knowing that Vic Fangio is going to know this offense as well as he knows it, I think he's going to try to pare everything down. He knows he needs to run the ball. And after seeing what Oakland was able to do, I think he's going to force the run at times where we're going to be surprised at how much they actually run the ball. I think he's also going to limit Mitch to one read plays because a lot of Derek Carr's success was on shorter underneath routes. So I think you'll probably see a lot of Taylor Gabriel in this game, probably a lot more Anthony Miller because he was non-existent last week. I think Allen Robinson is probably still going to get his, but you'll probably also see a lot of Tariq Cohen underneath, a lot of David Montgomery underneath. I think Nagy strips it down and tries to make this less complicated than they made it last week, because it was just a joke. The other problem for Denver this week is Bryce Callahan's out again, so that's probably a big reason that they struggled with the underneath stuff. And Bryce Callahan the year before was the top graded slot corner, so you lose him again. Again, their offense just did not look good enough. I think the Bears win this game, and I think that even with Denver's defense knowing what Chicago's going to do, I just don't think their offense is going to be good enough to hold the Chicago onslaught. So, I mean, I think this might be ugly if you're a Denver fan as far as watching what their offense is not going to be able to do against the Bears. Now, looking at Ted's got this the same way. So Ted's picking the Bears in this game. I don't think any of us are being homers in this. It's just seeing what Denver did against the Oakland defense. The Oakland's defense is nowhere near as good as the Bears defense. And
I'm taking the under in this one. I think this is going to be a 6-3 final. This is going to be bad.
Yeah.
It's just going to be unwatchable, but I just think that the Bears have a little bit more on offense and a lot more on defense than Oakland did. Not on offense more than Oakland, but on defense more than Oakland for sure. And I just don't think Denver is going to be able to do much of anything versus this front. But go ahead. Who's our next game?
So that brings us to the Sunday night game where the Philadelphia Eagles go down to Atlanta to play the Falcons. This is a game between a team that got behind early against a team that shouldn't have even been in that game from a talent standpoint, against another team that just absolutely no-showed the first three quarters on the road against the Minnesota Vikings. Now, the Eagles did lose Malik Jackson to a Liz Frank injury, which is foot injury. That's obviously going to be a huge loss. He's one of the best defensive tackles in the game. So that's going to be a huge hurdle for them to overcome, because the Falcons get a big favor in not having to worry about him. I just think that the Eagles overall are a better team than offensively, at least, than the Minnesota Vikings. I think Atlanta's going to have a hard time dealing with all those weapons. I think this is going to be a close game. The line as it stands is only 1.5. That's not a lot. So I think Philadelphia could probably win a really high-scoring, really entertaining game. But even if they only win by a field goal, that covers the 1.5. So I've got the Eagles winning this game on the road.
Yeah, this is my upset special of the week. I got Atlanta here, and this is my thinking behind it.
How was that an upset?
Well, but, I mean, I know that the line is only 1.5, but I think most people looking at it just between the two teams are automatically going to pick Philly. 90% of the time to beat Atlanta. If this was at home for Philly, this would be 4.5, 5, depending on where the money's going. So the bookies like Philly here, on the road, obviously, over Atlanta. I just think that, this is my thinking behind it. Atlanta shot themselves in the foot over and over, fell behind really big to Minnesota. Minnesota didn't have to do much. Atlanta could not stop the run, granted. So this, to me, is going to go one of two ways. I think Atlanta is going to make sure that they take Deshaun Jackson over the top away, because it's going to be an emphasis based on what happened in the week in the game versus Washington. He was able to beat them twice, so that is something that they're going to get rid of. I don't know if they're going to be able to stop the run much or anything at all, but on the other side of the ball, that Philly secondary, if you're a Philadelphia fan, I think you need to be a little worried here. Keenum was able to put up 380 on them, and I think 3 TDs, and they were, way ahead in that game until halftime. I just think that Atlanta, with that receiving core and Matt Ryan, this is kind of a prove-it game to me for Atlanta. If they're going to do anything this year, they really have to show up in this game. They might lose it. I wouldn't be surprised if they lose it by 3 points, but I think that they come out, prove everybody wrong. I think they're better against the run than they were versus Minnesota. I think Minnesota is actually a better running team than Philly is a little bit. They definitely proved that last week. I think Philly can run the ball, just not as well as Minnesota did. And I think that the Atlanta offense, those receivers on the outside, that tight end, with Freeman coming out of the backfield, I think they're going to show up and actually show people what they're capable of. I think, I don't think Ryan throws a pick versus that secondary. With that tackle being out for Philly now, I think they lose it a little bit up front. I just have Atlanta winning this one outright. Ted has Philly, so he's on par with you. He agrees with you. But that takes us to the Monday night game which is the Browns going into the Meadowlands. They're playing the Jets. Cleveland is a 2.5-point favorite, and this line to me is a little off. I'm not sure why. I guess it's because of how bad the Jets offense looked last week, but they did play versus Buffalo, who's a much better defense than the Browns defense is. I don't think that they have anywhere near as many problems moving the ball as they did versus Buffalo in this game. I think Gase corrects a lot of things. He's going to have a lot of tape from that game, the Tennessee-Cleveland game. I think he's going to be able to move the ball. They're going to try to make a statement that they're not as bad, and they're, the type of team that me and you both thought they are. I think me and you both had this Jets team winning 9 or 10 games this year, at least 8, and kind of showing up and, putting the league on notice a little bit that they're competitive. I don't have any faith in Cleveland. They looked horrific at times, outside of the opening drive and then a little bit of a flurry here and there, I think, at the beginning of the second half. The rest of that game was just very bad, period. Too many flags, too many mistakes. Baker looked like a rookie quarterback all over again. He had 3 pretty bad picks. He's going to try to force the ball into OBJ, and I know me and you have extensively discussed OBJ overall, and I just don't think he's the type of player that he used to be anymore, at least not in terms of production. He's just a prima donna out there. He's going to be wearing his really expensive watch. He's going to be looking good, but I don't think it translates into any kind of production on the field or, much of a benefit to Cleveland. I think that the Jets win this game. I think they just win this game. I have the Jets winning this game. How do you see it?
I disagree. I don't have a problem with the line where it is at 2.5. I mean, I actually may even think that's a little low for the Browns, and I only say it from this standpoint, just based on what we saw last week. Yes, the Jets have a better defense, probably than the Tennessee Titans, but the Jets gave up 7 catches for 123 yards to John Brown. Say what you will about Odell Beckham Jr., whether or not he's a head case, whether or not he's a diva, whatever you want to say about him. He's a better wide receiver than John Brown. And despite the fact that Baker Mayfield did not look great last week, I'd say that at the very least he's on par with quarterback play to Josh Allen. So if you've got those 2 factors going in, where, again, I'm taking OBJ over John Brown all day, every day, and then you've got Jarvis Landry, and you still have David Njoku, I think Freddie Kitchens is going to realize that he's going to need to run the ball with Nick Chubb some more. Even though, they gave Singletary last week had 70 yards. Frank Gore had another. Granted, it was 20 on 11 carries, but there were things there where as good as the Jets defense would have looked, there were still some things that they let slip. I think this is overall a better offense with Cleveland than Buffalo. Obviously, I think that the Cleveland Browns get right this week. That doesn't necessarily mean they're as good as everyone else thinks they are. I think this is another case where Adam Gase may not be able to get his car out of the garage outside of Le'Veon Bell. I think Cleveland's defense has got a lot of. I think Myles Garrett had a great game last week and nobody else helped him. I think this is a game where they try to go out there, make their stand, get back on that. Try to justify some of the hype, whether or not you think it's relevant. But I think the Browns win this game and get back on everyone's good graces. Ted agrees with me on that one. He's clearly got his man crush on Baker and the Browns. But again, just based on what I saw last week, Gase is still going to Gase, and I think the Browns get right in week 2 against the Jets on Monday night.
Okay, that wraps it up for this week's games. Please follow us along throughout the whole season and see how we do. Please hit like and subscribe. For Joey, I am Paul. Thank you for listening.
Such a simple plan to follow.